You cannot look to very well-known brands for inspiration for your creative strategy.
Yeah. How should brands treat UGC influencers?
I do think like from the very start, it is important to have like some level of an influencer program, just because as you mentioned, like.
So what's like one overrated metric you think in performance marketing these brands should ditch?
I don't know if it's one overrated metric, but it is always like focusing on only one metric.
Okay. When is a consumer founder ready to invest in paid programs?
I think generally a consumer founder should look towards paid once they have.
There are AI avatars everywhere. I'm not sure. Do we really need humans to sell products?
Yeah, I mean, I am a tech optimist, but I also think we are at a stage where you still do need some level of human touch. You know, the nature of the consumer mindset, they just don't trust celebrity endorsements as much as they used to.
Yeah.
And so I think if you are a founder, it's interesting right now because like with Shopify and Instagram and all these other things, like you do actually have access to the same audience that these celebrities do if you have like a.
Rei-Ling, it's so nice to have you here. You have scaled some iconic, very well-loved brands. You've been working in this space from the stone age of Facebook ads to where we are now, where they're saying AI will automate everything about marketing. So you have a lot to teach us. This is going to be a masterclass on performance marketing for consumer founders. So I want to start from the top. When is a consumer founder ready to invest in paid programs?
Yeah, I think generally a consumer founder should look towards paid once they have like a good understanding of what their business looks like in terms of like the lifetime value of their customers, the customer repeat behavior, and also just once they've established a core organic product market fit, then I think it's a good time to look into a paid strategy to really ramp that up. I do think until you like really understand how your customer behaves or whether or who your audience is or kind of what their purchase behavior is, it can be a little risky to jump right into paid because there's a lot of different factors in terms of how to scale a business that I think could go astray if you start spending a lot into your paid program. So I definitely think it's important to understand like basically how your business will perform on an organic level and have like your first core set of customers before moving into a paid program.
So I'm assuming you're not a big fan of like how there's this latest trend that you can engineer product market fit by just investing in a ton of Instagram ads.
No, I am not a big fan of that. I definitely think that, you know, paid marketing can inflate certain performance metrics. So you can drive traffic to your website, you can drive awareness, but until you have a solid foundational understanding of how customers are going to respond to your brand and also what your target or who your target audience is and what products they want from you, then I think it's very risky to go into paid marketing.
And, you know, there's different types of consumer businesses and different segments that might reap various benefits from paid programs, especially investing in Meta. Let's say you are a D2C founder invested in apparels or let's say makeup, some of the fast-moving fashion brands. What should they start with? How should they even think about structuring their team? What partnerships should they engage in?
Yeah. So I mean, I think when you're building out a paid program, it's really important to first do three things. One of which is like, and I kind of mentioned this already, but have a core understanding of what your business looks like. And so first, that's like doing a lifetime value analysis. So understanding like what is your average order value, what are your cohorted repeat purchase behaviors, and then over like a customer's first month, first 6 months, first year, and onwards, how much can you expect them to spend with you? And then start setting goals for your paid program based on that. And so usually for early stage consumer startups, I would aim for something in between like a 6 to 18 month win back period in terms of how much you can spend to acquire a customer and then the time it'll take to get that customer's profit back to the business. Anything below 6 months, I would say, is going to be tough to attain. And then anything beyond 18 months is just a little riskier for startups, because as you know, I mean, startups evolve a lot over the course of like 1 to 2 years. And so first I would do like a pretty deep dive analysis onto like what your business looks like today. I would also kind of audit your top of funnel. And so look at, okay, if we have a lot of people that are coming to our website, they've never heard about the brand. Like, what are they going to think about us? What is the information that we have to present? And thinking through a lot of like, I guess, landing page optimizations of what that first click looks like onto the website, and then also developing a welcome track or, you know, introductory offer in order to bring all of those eyeballs back. And then the last thing I would say is just to create like a few core creative messaging pillars in terms of how you want to present yourself, because I think for paid programs, it's really important to kind of quickly convey what your value proposition is to the end customer. Because as brands shift into paid marketing, one thing that they'll notice is that like consumer behavior tends to shift quite a bit when someone is finding out about you through an organic channel or through word of mouth versus when someone's clicking on an ad and learning about you through that like first browsing experience. And so I think doing a really deep dive into like, okay, what does our product page look like? Like, how are we differentiating ourselves from other businesses is important for companies to consider also in terms of like conversion optimization.
You know, I think that makes a ton of sense. But one of the biggest challenges that I've experienced, and I've also heard from other like D2C founders, is that they have their own brand mission, vision, and they've identified what the differentiating features are. But when they invest in paid programs, they're competing with what you would call ugly ads, but they seem to be performing really well. The messaging often is cringy, not aligning with their brand guidelines, but they're performing well.
Yeah.
So how should you think about winning and building that winning creative while staying true to your brand guidelines?
Yeah, and this is something that I think every brand will kind of have to work through in terms of like the balance between performance and brand. And this is where I see a lot of tension kind of come up, is between performance marketing teams who are often held towards like very specific metrics and goals, and brand teams or founders at early stage startups who really want to kind of build this longer lasting like emotion or feeling or look and feel around their brand. But I think the reality of social media is like you really have to cater your content to the person that's browsing their phone. And so the assets that you have on your website or potentially like a direct mail piece or something a lot more editorial just will not work. And I think that's what a lot of teams are starting to find, is that like UGC influencer driven content is a lot more, it feels more native to the feed and organic to the viewer. And so people kind of trust that recommendation more than what a traditional advertisement might look like. And so a lot of brands kind of have to learn, you know, what's the balance between brand and performance that they're willing to go after. And also specifically, as they start to test different campaigns, like what is the altered messaging that they should be presenting to these first-time customers, first on the ad and then on the website itself. And like, how is that gonna change?
I guess I have a ton of questions specifically on this, but before we dive into that, I want to talk about what should the team structure look like in, let's say, 2 stages of growth. One is like you're just starting out, you have a few SKUs you have to sell, versus you are already scaling and you're growing. And what should the team structure look like when it comes to performance marketing?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you're first starting out, you see companies either take 2 routes. One is like basically hire a marketing generalist. That person usually knows a good amount about retention, analytics, and acquisition, and then they're able to kind of build out all of the different parts of your program. So they can think about like the first channels that you want to go into, what should the budgeting and creative look like for that. But then they can also start to evaluate, okay, when someone lands on our website, what should our welcome track emails look like? Like, what is an ongoing communication strategy for how we can retarget these people? And they'll kind of start to work across a lot of different channels to find what's working and then really dive deep in on that. Mm-hmm. So that's like one option, is to hire someone that just has a lot of experience across a lot of different channels. Usually they've worked at other early stage businesses, because once businesses start to scale, skill sets become a lot more specialized.
They seem like a unicorn. Yeah. Tough to find.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think you hear about a lot on marketing and growth teams in Silicon Valley, but there are these people out there and they're generally very valuable to startups. So that's one option. Another option that I see a lot of businesses go after, and this I think is like an easier bet, is just to make a couple big bets into like one or two channels. So usually it's email marketing and Facebook or Meta, and then hire an agency to help them as they kind of develop this proof of concept. And then the agency can really kind of provide strategic input and also scale up and down based on their needs. I think the issue here is that sometimes like agencies, they are third-party partners. So, the turnaround times might not be as quick. And also just with startups, sometimes it can be nice to have someone in-house. But those are definitely two paths that I generally see founders take to build up their program. And then once you kind of have this proof of concept, you understand what channels are working and you understand like what's going to be the actual budgets within these channels, then you can start to make investments into more specialized employees, both on the performance marketing side and on the creative support.
And I guess like as someone who's like working in this space where you're using AI to generate creatives at scale, obviously we want AI to like try to automate most of it, integrate best into the workflows. I'm curious, even with AI, there's a lot of like slop that you see, and there's a class of brands and marketers that have taken the stand that we won't use AI, and that becomes our differentiator.
Yeah.
Whereas certain class are like, we're going to use AI all the time to a point where, I don't know, like the impact could be negative. So what's the best way for a lot of these brands to look at AI? Where should they integrate it?
Yeah, and this is actually a really interesting time because there isn't a clear answer for this. I do think it's not smart to eliminate AI as an option altogether, just because like there are really huge gains in efficiency and just general capabilities for especially early stage startups when starting to lean into these tools. And also, I mean, technology is really at a place where you can start to trust a lot of these things. Whereas like when I first started out, like in the Facebook Power Editor days, like, there was a lot of manual work that went into optimizing Facebook. You had to really closely watch your campaigns. You had to manually adjust bids, upload tons of creatives, and then watch them very closely every day. But then as Facebook started to launch like these automated systems, they really just weren't performing as well as what a human could do. And so there was still a good amount of skepticism as to how much you could trust technology. That, was over a decade ago. And so they've made some huge advancements. And for performance marketing, especially, like you can now really just trust the Facebook algorithm to do a lot of like the nitty gritty work. And then performance marketers kind of do like more of the strategic oversight and like inputting of like performance parameters in terms of how much you could spend per customer, what you want to optimize towards, and things like that. And so I think brands should follow kind of a similar playbook where they test what's right for them, understanding that like the technology is in a place where they can trust it, and that if they don't leverage AI or automation or any of these kind of like new tools, they'll probably fall behind.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of like cost savings and efficiencies that companies can gain while still maintaining like a very strong brand and core value.
I guess like back in the day, a consumer brand, be it in software or selling consumer packaged goods, they probably will invest in one TV commercial for the whole year, and it just like keeps running all the time. Today, I guess you have to test a ton, and it's not even clear what the right answer is. I'm not sure if even the best marketers really know. So what is something that's really overrated? Sorry, I guess like underrated, and maybe people overlook a lot, and you think maybe you should start investing when you're building a playbook for performance marketing?
Yeah. I mean, I think kind of exactly what you just said. I think it's often founders and teams tend to underestimate like the fluidity of performance on like channels like Facebook. And so back in the day, there would be companies that would put out one TV commercial, but first off, they didn't have like the performance monitoring to understand like what those things were actually driving. So I have a lot of skepticism as to what the lift there was. But then also I think like, especially more recently with Shopify becoming so popular, there's such like a large saturation of brands that people are much less brand loyal than they used to be. And so now like the competition is really just to stay top of mind. And in order to do that, like especially on social, like you constantly have to think through new creative ideas or things that you can put out there to your audience to remind you that you're an option for them to buy. So like I think the purchase decision, rather than being very like company and brand focused, has shifted into being more product focused and in the moment. And so that's one of the reasons why like putting out a lot of different creatives and testing different things is important, because you kind of have to constantly remind customers that you're an option. And also, I mean, just like consumers today, like their attention span is shorter than what it used to be. And so like creative fatigue windows and everything, you see them like starting or continually like shortening themselves. And so before, like on Facebook, you could maybe run a creative for a couple months. Now, generally, creatives start to fatigue after like a couple weeks. And in order to find that winning creative, you need to put out like 5 to 10 options for Facebook to test to really find what's going to win.
And the 5 to 10 option, that's for like each product you're selling, which means if as many SKUs you have, you probably need a very high volume testing capacity and creative engine setup.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's for necessarily the number of SKUs that you're selling, but it is for every creative concept. So let's say you have a fall sale, new product launch, you know, just general like category that you want to push. Within each one of those ad sets is usually how you would categorize them in Facebook. You should be pushing out like at least 5 to 10 creatives weekly for Facebook to test and figure out like what's going to work within your audience, which they're able to find on their own. So you don't need to do the work of trying to figure that out anymore. But if you're not putting creatives out like very frequently, you'll start to see basically all of your performance metrics spike. And then it can kind of falsely look like a program is not working when really you're just not providing the right input for it to succeed.
I guess something that I've noticed is almost every brand has some UGC, or if I meet a founder who is just starting a brand, let's say they want to sell apparels, they're all looking for UGC, and obviously it's a chicken and egg problem because sometimes you don't have enough capital to build the right UGC network, or the UGCs that want to work with you are probably not the ones that you want to work with. So how should brands treat UGC influencers? Have you reached a point where people are tired of them? And second question is, at what point is your brand held back by these UGC influencers?
Yeah, I do think like from the very start, it is important to have like some level of an influencer program, just because as you mentioned, like UGC is a really big part of paid marketing and of brand building. Like I think maybe a decade ago, it was kind of the same as like if you get a mention in Vogue, then your business would take off. Now it's like, okay, if you find the right set of influencers to mention your brand, they have like a very trusted set of followers that will trust their recommendations, and they'll start to resonate more towards you. And then another thing about UGC that I think has been interesting and that brands need to do in order to succeed is like, often you'll invest in a sponsored post, but you have to like have a strategy of how you're going to replicate those assets across channels. So are you going to promote or basically are you going to use paid marketing to promote the assets that they gave you? Can you also put it in email on your website? Like what are all of the different ways that you can repurpose that so that you're able to basically get the most return on the cost there? Just because a lot of influencers, I mean, they're basically celebrities now, and so they're very expensive to work with. So if you just measure like what a sponsored post might be, the return is never going to work out. And that I think can sometimes be something that founders are deterred by, just because they're not measuring like the overall impact of what this asset could have. And so instead, I would kind of think of them as like your brand's models in some ways. Like they're your brand's PR, they're your models, and then they're your traditional influencers. And so from the model perspective, like they are the people that are driving your performance marketing. They're the people that are basically like building social trust within social media, social media as a recommendation towards your brand. And then to answer your second question in terms of like, when should you start evaluating whether or not you're relying too much on them? I mean, they are very expensive. And it's not as scalable as like creating an asset in-house.
Yeah.
Because like in order to have a UGC program, you either need to plug into a network like ShopMy or some affiliate network, and you usually need to have someone that's actually interacting with their agents and setting these deals and setting the pricing, and it works on like a very transactional level for each sponsored post that you're getting. And so for small teams especially, like that's not incredibly scalable in-house. And so I think if you're too heavily reliant on UGC, you're going to hit a point where it becomes really hard to scale your paid program, because there's all of this work that goes into just getting those initial assets out. And so I think it should always be part of your strategy while you're also figuring out, okay, within our editorial assets or our studio shoots, like how can we repurpose these ads or these assets in order to create ads that people will buy from as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You said, oh, like if you had a UGC influencer, it's the same as like getting a mention in Vogue. And I think that's like the perfect way to like sum up what's happening in social media. I'm really curious. So does it mean that if you're running a celebrity-owned brand, which there are many, you have a leg up over somebody in Central America starting their own makeup business?
You might have somewhat of a leg up, but it is not as extreme as it was before. Like I'll never forget, like when Angelina Jolie wore an Everlane bag, like our business took off. Like that was a huge game changer. And she just like carried one, I think, to the airport or something, and she was photographed in it. And so I can imagine if you're a celebrity and you're starting a brand, you're starting with this large network, and that gives you, a starting point that a lot of other companies don't have. But, the nature of the consumer mindset, they just don't trust celebrity endorsements as much as they used to, and they're also not looking to celebrities to like drive their lifestyle decisions. And so I think if you are a founder like that doesn't have all these connections, that isn't celebrity backed, it's interesting right now because like with Shopify and Instagram and all these other things, like you do actually have access to the same audience that these celebrities do if you have like a well thought out growth strategy. And so there is a lot more leverage that founders can take to grow their businesses than there was before. Because before, like, advertising was limited, it was hard to build a website on your own. And so, like, there were just less options out there. And so you needed more resources to get your business off the ground. Whereas like now you can start a business, in the same way that a celebrity would, and you could have like a small paid marketing budget and start to acquire customers in a really thoughtful way. And I think another thing with celebrity endorsements is often they'll kind of rely on their followers to drive their success without having like the foundational like growth strategy that some of these other founders might have. And that can be risky too, because, the consumer mindset is changing. And even if you have 1 million followers, like they might not be interested specifically in what you're trying to buy. So I think celebrities should kind of take like a similar playbook to what a non-well-known startup founder would do as well.
I guess that makes sense because, I mean, if you're running a business, it doesn't matter if you were successful in an adjacent field. One thing is that you probably have seen this already, like there are AI avatars everywhere, and I'm not sure where things would go. I think it could go anyway, but do we really need humans to sell products?
Yeah. I mean, I am a tech optimist, but I also think we are at a stage where you still do need some level of human touch. What that level is, I think, is going to be determined in the next like 5 to 10 years. But for brands to build credibility right now, like, I think both from the back-end workflow processes, like you can rely on AI to create a lot of your creative assets, but you should still have a creative director that's monitoring a lot of this stuff, making sure that it tells a cohesive story. In the same way as like from the front end, you can have AI models, and a lot of the times you honestly can't really tell the difference, but I think it could be risky to lean too much into them without having any level of human touch. So I think it's just finding the right balance for your business. And a lot of this, honestly, over the next couple of years is just going to require testing internally, like from the founders or the marketing team to understand like what's working and what direction you can go in, and then just kind of find the balance based on that.
The way I see it too is like you don't want to replace humans, but there's a lot of stories that can be told just because the people who are part of the stories, don't want to be on camera or whatever. And there's many opportunities where AI can help bring those stories to life. But I agree, like it's really important to have human in the loop. I'm really curious. There's like paid programs, there's like external channels, like Meta is a big one. What is your take on TikTok, YouTube, Amazon? That's also growing today.
Yep.
And when should companies look into different channels? How do they build their portfolio for paid programs in those channels?
Yeah. So I guess this is more about like performance marketing investments and knowing where to go. And this actually now something else has kind of popped into my head in response to your last question in terms of like how much can you rely on AI models. I think one thing that'll be really cool for brands to see is that like if you use certain AI models, let's say for photo shoots on your website or for converting product pages that are all images into having some video, if you use AI for that, you can actually generate a lot of cost savings. Where then you could allocate your budget towards, I do think some of it would still go towards humans, but like you can start to find pockets of your business where you can, where like maybe the human touch isn't as necessary, or like you can augment certain photo shoots or whatever it may be, and then reinvest that budget. Maybe it's more heavily going into influencer partnerships or expanding your SKU collection. And so, yeah, I think from an investment perspective, it's important to think of like, for founders, I guess now to really map out, okay, like what is very authentic and genuine to our brand, and what do we need to keep versus like, where can we lean on AI a little bit more, and like, what will that cost savings be? Based on that cost savings, where could we reallocate that in like our more genuine storytelling channels? I think that'll actually be like a really interesting phase for marketing and brand professionals to go through over the next couple of years. But in terms of channels for companies to invest in, I mean, the first one usually across the board is just going to be Facebook. Like their platform, I mean, it's pretty incomparable in terms of like the reach, the types of assets that they can create, and also just how easy it is to get ads off the ground. Like if you wanted to start advertising in an hour, like you could read a little bit about Ads Manager, but you could probably launch something if you were a founder. And luckily, like the platform is smart enough where if you put in like, hey, I want to optimize these ads towards conversions on my website, I'm willing to spend $100 per customer, Facebook will go out and find the right people to display your ad to, and they won't display it if like your creative's not working. So from a performance perspective, and also just from like a time to go live, like internal resourcing perspective, that's usually the right place to start. But generally, like I don't think, like brands don't really need to reinvent the wheel in terms of what channels they're going into. I think they can look at other companies in their industry and see like where they're finding success, and then as they think about channel expansion or where to invest next, like just go into into those. Like for example, like you see a lot of mental health companies, which is a really big industry right now, or online mental health companies starting to promote on podcasts, probably because there's a lot of storytelling there, and they can find shows that really kind of closely align with certain mental health issues or high stress situations. Like founders in Silicon Valley, I've noticed that they've started targeting that in terms of like coaching and stress management. And then also like another kind of, I guess, industry that I've noticed starting with other channels is skincare usually will rely heavily on YouTube, just because there is a lot of, it's more valuable to have like the longer form video narrative of like, you know, before and afters with your skin versus just kind of quick ads on Facebook as to like, you know, what do your products look like, or what are like some quick value propositions. But yeah, I think Facebook is the right place to start. And then like, as you think about where to expand next, I would look at like what other companies in your industries are doing. Generally, that's like a good place to look. And then, I mean, think through based on who's buying your product, both organically and on Facebook, like where are they going to spend their time in other areas of the world? Is it on Google? Is it on podcasts? Is it out of home? So like direct mail can be a really good channel for certain brands, especially ones that are very location specific. And then I think a channel that'll be really interesting to just kind of monitor moving forward is I know like ChatGPT and all these other networks are like starting to launch commerce within their platforms. And so I think that'll be a big opportunity for brands.
You know, what you said makes a ton of sense, and I feel like I'll use it in my next pitch, which is as a founder, you're trying to allocate capital. So AI is not about like taking jobs away or replacing certain people, but if AI gives you the opportunity to optimize costs on one part of it, which can be product photography or let's say creative generation, it gives you more capital to use it for UGC, which is obviously an authentic way to connect with their customers.
Yeah.
I guess just moving a little bit forward on this part, which is a lot of brands also don't want dependencies on these platforms. So once for top of the funnel, they start using platforms like Instagram or TikTok, people come to their website, they want to see how to build direct relationships. I'm wondering what is the role of a performance marketer when it comes to optimizing for these consumer journeys. Once somebody comes to the website, what should they do? What should they be held responsible for?
Yeah. And this was actually something that I worked on a lot at some of the startups that I worked at previously, like Everlane and Blue Bottle, was basically like landing page optimization. So thinking through not just like the strategy of your first touch or introduction to the brand, which is usually the ad that people are clicking on, but once you go one level deeper, like what is the story or like the information that you need to present in order to convert this customer? And there's a few different parts of that. There's first, like you should always optimize for like as quick of a lead capture as possible. So that's why you always see like people asking for your email in exchange for like a discount or like dollar gift or whatever it may be. And then you can start to, and then you can retarget them through all these other channels like SMS and like email welcome tracks. But then the second part of it is like when you land on the website, like how are you presenting yourself on as a brand? Like are you showing the right products? So should you push someone into a product page, a collections page, and then also like does this person resonate with the models that are on the page? Will this person understand like basically what the value of your product is in exchange for the price point? Because that's like what every consumer is like thinking as they're evaluating a new brand. And small things like that we would test in terms of like the amount of information that we showed. So at Everlane, we showed 4 different models with 4 different body types, and that increased conversion a ton because when you're only showing one model with a very specific body type, a lot of different buyers will just, they don't know how to like envision how this new product would fit onto their body, and it just feels a little less relatable. Or like, I mean, A/B testing things like what's the first image that you show when someone lands? Like, how does that resonate with people? You'll actually find like pretty big swings in purchase conversion as you start to make these small changes. Or I mean, another big win, and I don't know how familiar you are with the brand, but Everlane had like this infographic that was basically what are the costs that go into making an item and what are we charging you and how does that compare to a traditional retail brand? And so basically when you cut out like retail space and some of the other added costs, that's why like we were trying to tell the story that it's the same quality, but we were kind of going direct to consumer, and that's why we were able to charge like cheaper prices. And so just presenting like that piece of information on every landing page that paid customers were coming to increased both conversion or first time purchase conversion, but also retention, because I think it was enough storytelling to gain trust with the buyer and also convey ourselves as like a cheaper luxury brand, but not a cheaper brand, period. So like conveying that value. And then, I mean, another small thing that people can do, or that brands often like overlook is like, how are they presenting sizing? Is that clear to the customer? Do the models resonate with people? What page should they be landing on? Also, how many products should you present when someone first lands? Like all of those small factors can actually really kind of change the way a first-time customer thinks about you.
Absolutely. And I guess like the other thing that's on top of mind for most people is that how do they attract Gen Z audiences? And oftentimes in an effort to do that, they come across really cringy. So I'm curious, like, what's your take on how to kind of work with like these new audience segments that frankly, there's a huge age gap between like the teams running these brands versus the audience they're trying to attract?
Yeah. And I will candidly say Gen Z is not my specialty. I'm not a Gen Zer, and I also, a lot of the brands have targeted older age groups that I've worked with. But I mean, I think it's a similar mentality where you have to just kind of go into it, like A, understanding how they spend their time and what matters to them. And then B, also like showing up in the places they will be in a way that is relevant and relatable to them. So I mean, I've never seen a brand work on TikTok, but that could be like a way to reach them, or you know, the different ways that you might present products online. Like I've noticed a lot of brands starting to show UGC instead of like actual product photography. Like they'll just show snippets of influencers using their products, and they have a lot of customer reviews. Like I think those things are all very important in terms of purchase behavior for younger audiences, whereas like older audiences are much more kind of focused on like brand trust and like having a more elevated, refined feel. And so landing pages often convey that a little bit more. And then I also think with Gen Z, it'll be important to kind of really integrate yourself into just commerce within all of these platforms. So like direct to purchase within ChatGPT, direct to purchase within TikTok whenever they launch that, the shops within Instagram. Like I think they're shopping a lot more, I mean, entirely on mobile and in platform. So thinking through kind of removing that step where they're going to the website and making sure that you're presenting enough information up front for them to make that purchase decision could really help with converting them as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess something that came to my mind is obviously as a brand, you want to try out different things, experiment, and sometimes marketing can be a money pit. And when do you know that you are going in the wrong direction, and what structures or guardrails should you have in place so that you don't end up in a situation that you would regret?
Yeah, and this is why like one of the first things I mentioned is having like a very clear foundation or foundational understanding of what your business looks like, because I think for larger companies you can kind of allocate budget and acquire more losses towards things that are not working just for like brand awareness and brand building. But for startups, I think you have to be a lot more diligent about how much you're willing to spend on a customer and whether or not you're achieving that. Like it really comes back to like your cost per acquisition and then your LTV and matching those two to one another, and then making sure that like the volume of customers that you're acquiring is matching is like scaling at a rate where you can hit your revenue goals, but maintain those other metrics. And so I think once you know, the way that you would know that something is not working, well, Facebook will give you indications. Like all of a sudden people will stop engaging with your ad, or like they'll just stop spending towards your account. But I think it does take a lot of monitoring to make sure that the dollars that you're putting in are generating the predicted revenue that you thought was going to come from these customers, and also watching like beyond that first purchase, what are these customers' behaviors? Because I've also seen people will lean really heavily into one type of acquisition, but it actually acquires like very low value people. And so that ends up like over the course of 3 months where they were predicting to have the same retention rates as like what they were seeing before, the company or the business all of a sudden drops. They can't really dig into what's going on. And so like on the campaign optimization level, it's really just making sure you're hitting those like top of funnel goals that you initially set. And if you do want to kind of allow for some flexibility or testing, having a clearly defined idea of what that might look like, and knowing that it might not, the test group should not feed into like your revenue that you have to hit 100%. And then also just monitoring past first click, past first purchase, like how are these people behaving? And a lot of the times I think it's good to break that into like what channel are they coming through, what month did they sign up, and then also like what type of or what product category are they entering the brand through?
Yeah. I guess something interesting that's happening is because, as you mentioned, traditional advertising is dead. Everybody wants to look and feel authentic on social media. So there's a lot of interesting creatives generated almost every day. So when these high fashion brands or accessible luxury brands, their strategy just 10 years ago was very different, whereas today it's very different. So if what is native to the feed is what works, and a lot of these brands have shaped their identity around coming up with very unique editorial styles, really well crafted, perfect models, how can they really win in this environment?
Yeah, and that actually is another thing that I think is risky for startups is that you cannot replicate or you cannot look to very well-known brands for inspiration for your creative strategy. Because if you are a brand that everyone already knows about, your goals are going to be very different than what a startup would do. And then also like your creatives can be more focused on just kind of maintaining your brand value and displaying new products that are coming, that are launching for the season or whatever it may be. And so I do see a lot of startups say like, hey, you know, Kate, which is like a high-end fashion brand, they're doing this in their advertising. We've tried to replicate that, but we're not seeing conversions. And it's like, okay, well, you know, half of luxury buyers know what Kate is. And so when they're seeing this ad, they already have a different level of knowledge than what they're going to see when they're looking to you. So like as a younger, smaller brand, like you need to build that trust through UGC, through kind of concisely stating your value propositions, different methods like that.
I think I was just trying to understand, you know, especially someone in mid-market or luxury products, like their playbook for growth was very different because they carefully crafted every pixel. Whereas today, I think they are going through a shift where it's not like people don't want luxury products. The audience has expanded, but for them, it's not in their DNA to come up with thousands of creatives to test. But unfortunately, that's what you need to win in Meta.
Yeah, and I think you are seeing a lot of, it's interesting because you see a lot of startups look to these like big luxury brands for inspiration. Then once you get into those big luxury brands, which I've talked to a lot of people that work at these bigger companies, they're actually looking back at startups for like the innovative ways to think about like what is the content that they should be putting out, how should they be communicating with their customers. So I do think there's different things that each stage can learn from each other. For these larger brands that have these very established creatives and just general audience knowledge of them, I think the way that they can kind of continue to stay relevant is to follow a lot of like the strategies that these startups are going to do. So they should be working with influencers. They should, you know, have some content that feels native to the feed, even if it really doesn't align with with the way that they had been traditionally presenting themselves. But knowing that, they also have a lot more like leeway into just continuing with their traditional editorial assets because they have such a large awareness. And a lot of them are kind of reselling themselves to these other platforms that are using kind of these scrappier, more organic methods. So like a lot of high-end retailers are being resold through Saks or Nordstrom's or Shopbop or whatever it may be. And you'll see Shopbop is following like the traditional UGC influencer strategy. And so they're kind of just going through those. I mean, they're using like the wholesale channel as like their way to stay relevant. And then they kind of internally will keep like their high-end brand assets or whatever it may be. And they might be testing stuff, but like I think they can rely on these other channels to like really, I guess, accelerate them.
So what's like one overrated metric you think in performance marketing these brands should ditch?
I don't know if it's one overrated metric, but it is always like focusing on only one metric. So like if you see, and I've worked at startups where like growth was out of control. We were acquiring like an insane amount of first-time customers. Like there are a lot of like vanity metrics where you really need to dive deep into how you're communicating your brand, who you're selling to, and like who are these people that are being introduced to your brand, and like how are they going to behave over time. So like let's say you see huge spikes in traffic or huge spikes in new customers, it's I think dangerous to just look at those metrics as an indicator of success without balancing them with other behaviors that could be happening kind of like one level deeper. And that's why I think like sometimes companies are like, let's just pay attention to or like first-time customer revenue, which is, it can be a good guiding force for teams to like feel motivated if they're able to like really spike there. But you do need like either parts of your team or different leaders really focused on optimizing towards different areas of the customer funnel. And then maybe each one of those is paying attention to one metric, but like the overall team is working across balancing all of them.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if there's like one specific metric I would point to as just like garbage. I think a lot of them can be helpful depending on your goals, but it is important to know that there are a lot of ways that data can tell stories that are not actually happening.
Yeah.
And that if you're not paying close attention to that, especially as a startup, you can find yourself in like a pretty bad place relatively quickly.
You're probably in your own echo chamber and you just keep telling yourself you're succeeding in your life.
Yeah, I mean, even with like Path or some of these social media networks where they were able to, like, they experienced explosive growth and then 3 months later, like they're not, or not 3 months, but you know, a short amount of time later, they're not like valid businesses.
Yeah.
Like you see a lot of, I think, startups really chase vanity metrics or like top of funnel growth when that can just be like a dangerous playbook to get away.
Yeah. You know, I could go on and on asking you questions, but I love to ask this question every time I wrap up. What does the future of consumer marketing and performance look like in 2030? So just 5 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, the next 5 years, I think a lot of things are going to change. I think, you know, AI actually I think is going to play a really big role. It's interesting, I think, from an internal team's perspective, it'll be cool to see how these new tools and technologies are going to make people and teams more efficient and where they're going to come into play within different parts of the organization. But I think as an overall mentality, like thinking about how you can gain efficiency and like give people their time back, have similar outputs, and basically delegate a lot of like annoying rote tasks to tools and technology will be a really big game changer for marketing teams. And then externally, like I think we kind of touched on this earlier, but it'll be really interesting to see where AI models or AI content in general takes brands over the next 5 years. And it's hard for me to predict where that'll land. But I think similar to like when influencers launched or even the internet launched, like we're going to see a really big shift in consumer behavior and also advertising strategy by 2030.
Yeah.
So like it'll be cool to see. And yeah, I mean, I think right now is a really important time for founders to really start thinking through like, how do we want to balance this? Like, what do we want to prioritize? And where do we see these technologies fitting into our business? And then just testing and iterating based on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great wrap to the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.